really start the next chapter in the Livewire book, and our limit.
Make it easier for businesses to create more jobs and more factories in the United States.
Demographic begins to age out of the motorcycle market. I mean, first there was the rewire strategy, and then once you took the helm, you have now unveiled.
Jochen Zeitz stepped onto the global stage with a clarity that few corporate leaders dare display, directly challenging the newly inaugurated President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff rhetoric. In the halls of Harley-Davidson's Milwaukee headquarters, the reverberations of Trump's threat to impose a draconian 200% levy on Ford products, should the automaker proceed with plans to shift production to Mexico, had already sent shockwaves through American industry. Zeitz, brimming with conviction, refused to remain silent as the administration's protectionist measures rippled outward, entangling not only Ford but every company navigating a trade war ignited by White House edicts. His response was swift and pointed. A calculated maneuver intended to defend the principles of open markets and to underscore the complexities of a global supply chain that presidential proclamations could neither simplify nor restrain. Before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates. The backdrop to this confrontation was a titanic clash over trade policy, one that exploded after President Trump announced punitive tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from key allies. Those initial measures set off a domino effect. Canada, the European Union, and Mexico retaliated in kind, imposing levies on American products ranging from whiskeys to motorcycles. Harley-Davidson, emblematic of quintessential Americana, watched export costs soar as European dealers contemplated steep price hikes or outright product blackouts. The decision by some motorcycle enthusiasts to pre-order models underlining domestic assembly left many U.S. workers uneasy. Meanwhile, Trump, ever attuned to headlines, pivoted to targeting Ford, which was considering a shift of small car production to Baja to remain cost competitive. By threatening a 200% tariff, the president delivered a dramatic demonstration of executive power, but one that risked undermining the broader health of international commerce. In boardrooms across Detroit and Dearborn, executives met in urgency, weighing the consequences of every corporate maneuver against the looming specter of punitive duties. When Zeitz issued his statement, he seized upon a critical juncture. The administration's willingness to weaponize tariffs against domestic champions undermined confidence in U.S. manufacturing resilience. By striking back, Zeitz signaled that Harley-Davidson would not bow to political pressure designed to micromanage industrial strategy. He knew that the very prospect of arbitrary across-the-board levies threatened the viability of multinational operations, where even minor shifts in cost structures could reverberate through global distribution networks. His rebuttal framed the debate not as a partisan clash, but as a defense of strategic autonomy for businesses obligated to serve customers worldwide. At the heart of Zeitz's retort lay an insistence that Harley-Davidson's global ambitions were not optional whims, but economic imperatives. With nearly half of its sales generated outside U.S. borders, the motorcycle maker depended on efficient, diversified supply chains that could respond to soaring demand from Asia to Latin America. Zeitz reminded observers that tariffs, like blunt instruments, lack the nuance to distinguish friend from foe or to calibrate manufacturing incentives. A 200% surcharge on one automaker, he argued, would rupture cost models for dozens of suppliers, from tire makers in East Asia to parts fabricators in the American Midwest. In doing so, the administration risked collateral damage that extended far beyond Ford's factory floors. The implications extended to investors, whose calculus hinged on predictable cash flows and manageable risk profiles. Zeitz's confrontation with the White House rippled through financial markets. Share prices for automakers flickered as analysts attempted to quantify the sting of potential tariffs. Hedge funds recalibrated positions in industrial stocks, while bond traders eyed corporate debt offerings with added caution. In this climate of uncertainty, Zeitz's outspoken defense of free trade principles served as both rallying cry and cautionary tale, reminding stakeholders that corporate strategies hinged not only on domestic policy, but on the fickle dynamics of geopolitical brinkmanship. Political ramifications followed swiftly, as Congress came under pressure to clarify the scope of presidential tariff authority. Lawmakers from both parties, already uneasy with the administration's unilateral approach, seized upon Zeitz's rebuke to demand hearings. Committees on Ways and Means chaired by legislators from export-dependent districts found themselves at center stage. Testimonies from manufacturing executives, farmers, and tech leaders painted a picture of interwoven supply chains that could not be unraveled without inflicting widespread economic pain. Zeitz's stance lent weight to bipartisan appeals for a more measured, consultative process in setting trade policy, one that recognized the stakes for a spectrum of industries tethered to global markets. Consumers, too, felt the tremors. Enthusiasts who had long celebrated Harley-Davidson's roar on winding highways now confronted the prospect of sharply elevated prices. In locales from Sao Paulo to Munich, pre-orders stalled as dealers grappled with the fallout from both European retaliatory tariffs and potential new duties on U.S. automotive exports. Meanwhile, prospective Ford buyers reeled at higher numbers attached to sticker prices. For families budgeting the purchase of a reliable sedan, the decision on where their next car would be built suddenly felt politicized. Zeitz's challenge to Trump tapped into this undercurrent of consumer frustration, asserting that end users bore the ultimate burden of impromptu trade battles. Global supply chain architects took note, recognizing that the administration's actions underscored a need for strategic hedging. Multinational firms began diversifying procurement across regions, accelerating investment in manufacturing hubs less vulnerable to U.S.-China tensions or transatlantic disputes. Zeitz's exposition highlighted the risks of concentrating capacity in any single jurisdiction. In boardrooms from Tokyo to Toronto, executives sketched contingency plans to shift assembly lines or to stockpile critical components. The scramble for supply chain resiliency served as testament to Zeitz's warning that tariffs did more than rearrange costs. They rewrote the rulebook of global production networks. Economists weighed in, arguing that Zeitz's critique transcended a single industry skirmish. They pointed to decades of empirical data showing that open trade correlated with higher productivity, consumer choice, and innovation. Tariffs, by creating artificial price floors, discouraged competition and stifled technological progress. In this context, Harley-Davidson's bold stand became a case study in corporate statesmanship, a business asserting the broader public good by defending the principle that comparative advantage should guide resource allocation. For students of trade theory, Zeitz's intervention underscored the tension between short-term political objectives and long-term economic vitality. Harley-Davidson's brand image took on new dimensions as a consequence. Once synonymous primarily with rugged individualism, the company found itself repositioning as a defender of global commerce and industrial cooperation. Zeitz's message, amplified across social media and mainstream outlets, cast the motorcycle maker not only as an automotive innovator but as a steward of economic diplomacy. In marketing circles, analysts noted the subtle pivot. By aligning with free trade ideals, Harley-Davidson sought to broaden its appeal among younger, globally minded consumers, even as it maintained ties to its blue-collar roots. The corporate identity thus evolved, reflecting the nuanced interplay between domestic heritage and international engagement. Other U.S. firms watched Zeitz's gambit closely, recognizing the precedent it set. Tech giants and consumer goods companies whose sprawling operations spanned continents weighed the merits of publicly challenging government mandates. For some, the risk of political backlash remained too great. For others, Zeitz's example offered a blueprint for negotiating with the administration from a position of moral high ground. The CEO's actions sparked internal debates over corporate social responsibility, suggesting that business leaders could leverage public opinion to shape policy outcomes. In boardrooms, executives deliberated whether to join coalitions defending global trade norms or to adopt quieter behind-the-scenes lobbying strategies. Strategically, Zeitz's stance reframed Harley-Davidson's long-term planning. The company accelerated efforts to establish assembly facilities in Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, moves aimed at insulating the business from ad hoc tariff swings. By deepening local partnerships and investing in regional supply chain nodes, Harley-Davidson sought to guarantee market access regardless of evolving trade barometers. Zeitz argued that such decentralization would create jobs abroad as well as at home, fostering goodwill in critical markets, and building a buffer against political volatility in Washington. The strategy underscored a shift in corporate doctrine. Globalization was not a fate to be avoided, but a competitive advantage to be managed. The message sent ripples through trade diplomacy circles, where negotiators grappled with the optics of escalating tariffs. Zeitz's public challenge raised expectations that trade agreements should enshrine safeguards against unilateral punitive measures. Ambassadors and economic attachés began recalibrating their proposals, seeking stronger dispute resolution mechanisms and clearer rules on industrial subsidies. Zeitz's intervention thus transcended the realm of corporate press releases, influencing the contours of future trade pacts and underscoring the role that private actors can play in shaping multilateral frameworks. Outside the immediate maelstrom of tariffs and counter-tariffs, another battlefield quietly emerged, the labyrinthine world of regulatory compliance. With Washington's tone emboldening protectionist measures, multinational firms began scrutinizing the patchwork of standards governing environmental, safety, and labor practices around the globe. Jochen Zeitz's defense of open commerce underscored a deeper message. Regulatory cohesion can serve as a bulwark against the unpredictability of trade edicts. Corporations seized on this moment to push for harmonized rules that would reduce the cost of international expansion, from emissions thresholds for manufacturing plants to cross-border certification for critical components. By rallying peers to advocate for mutual recognition agreements, Zeitz and other industry leaders aimed to construct a regulatory passport, an assurance that goods produced according to agreed standards would glide across borders without the friction of redundant audits or belated tariff classifications. This push dovetailed with broader dialogues on sustainability, as companies recognized that consistent environmental mandates not only safeguarded the planet, but also insulated their operations from the strategic whims of political cycles. At the same time, risk management teams and corporate headquarters reassessed the premiums they were willing to pay for political risk insurance. Historically, such policies covered asset expropriation or upheaval in unstable regimes. But in the wake of the Harley-Davidson versus White House clash, insurers began treating tariff announcements as insurable events. Underwriters debated whether a sudden government decree increasing duties by hundreds of percentage points qualified as a political act under existing clauses. The outcome of these deliberations would have profound implications. Should companies secure protection against punitive tariffs? Or would such endorsements only encourage governments to weaponize trade for domestic gain? Zeitz's outspoken stance illuminated the stakes here. By refusing to capitulate, he signaled that corporate defense budgets must adapt to a world where regulatory edicts and tariff proclamations carry equally disruptive potential. This spurred conversations among captains of industry about the role of underwriting in stabilizing global commerce, a topic that had long lurked at the periphery of boardroom agendas. Meanwhile, regional economic development agencies scrambled to position their territories as attractive alternatives for manufacturing investments. From Central Europe to Southeast Asia, policymakers seized on Washington's mercurial tariff tactics to court executives seeking predictability. Free trade zones, special economic districts, and gigafactory incentives proliferated as these jurisdictions dangled streamlined customs procedures and bespoke regulatory environments. Zeitz's emphasis on decentralization resonated with such efforts. His defense of adaptive manufacturing networks lent corporate heft to the narrative that risk-averse firms should spread capacity across multiple hubs. This development carried significant weight for emerging economies, where job creation hinged on capturing a slice of global assembly lines. Yet it also introduced new challenges. Local workforces had to be trained at breakneck speed, infrastructure needed upgrading, and small suppliers had to scale operations to meet stringent quality benchmarks. The race to become the next magnet for foreign direct investment thus morphed into a high-stakes gamble, one at which Zeitz's public advocacy had thrown down the gauntlet. Financial services providers did not remain on the sidelines. Trade finance, a sector already grappling with digital transformation, found itself at the eye of the storm. Letters of credit, documentary collections, and export credit agencies reevaluated the collateral requirements for transactions involving U.S. goods. Because tariffs have the power to erode profit margins overnight, lenders demanded larger guarantees or higher interest rates on loans tied to American exporters. Zeitz's vociferous defense of free trade sharpened the urgency of these recalibrations. Exporters and their bankers convened to explore innovative solutions, self-liquidating credit instruments, blockchain-backed title transfers, and parametric insurance that would automatically compensate firms for specified tariff hikes. These developments promise to speed up the movement of goods and reduce settlement times, yet they also revealed the hidden costs that protectionist policies extract from the financial ecosystem. In challenging the administration's approach, Zeitz had inadvertently spotlighted the imperative to modernize trade finance infrastructure, a reform long overdue. Beyond physical goods, the clash over tariffs cast a new spotlight on digital trade. Data flows, cross-border e-commerce, and cloud services are often overlooked in discussions of steel and aluminum duties, yet they represent an ever-expanding frontier of global commerce. Zeitz recognized that imposing levies on tangible products could spur attempts to erect similar barriers around digital transactions, data localization requirements, source code audits, or discriminatory bandwidth charges. Policy think tanks began drafting white papers warning of a digital curtain that might follow the steel tariffs if governments found success in slicing traditional trade. Tech CEOs quietly referenced Harley-Davidson's predicament in their deliberations, arguing for the inclusion of digital safeguards in trade pacts and pressing for digital free trade zones where cross-border data transfers would be guaranteed. The broader dialogue thus shifted. Tariffs on motorcycles could herald an age in which anything encoded in zeros and ones might be subject to political scrutiny. Currency markets, too, registered the shockwaves. Economists noted that when a major economy adopts protectionist measures, capital flows often adjust in response, leading to currency realignments that can partially offset tariff impacts. The US dollar, typically a safe haven, experienced volatility as investors weighed the potential for a downward correction if trade disputes dampened growth. Zeitz's intervention helped crystallize this phenomenon in real time. By publicly debating the efficacy of tariffs, he underscored the link between policy uncertainty and FX fluctuations. Multinational treasurers scrambled to hedge exposures, using forward contracts and options to lock in exchange rates for anticipated revenue streams. Meanwhile, central banks in allied nations debated whether to intervene in currency markets to cushion their exporters, an extraordinary step that spoke volumes about the interconnectedness of trade policy and monetary stability. On the legal front, global council teams initiated a flurry of preparatory work for potential disputes at the World Trade Organization. Although the WTO's dispute resolution mechanism had been under strain, with its appellate body partially incapacitated, high-profile cases could still land before panels that might censure unilateral U.S. actions. Zeitz's public call to defend free trade norms lent momentum to filings that might allege violations of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Trade law firms found themselves inundated with requests for memos on the viability of challenging massive duty hikes. Even absent binding judgments, the mere threat of WTO scrutiny threatened to complicate the administration's calculus. Zeitz's stance thus transcended boardroom posturing, feeding directly into the legal strategies that would shape the next chapter of global trade jurisprudence. Yet it was not only colossal multinationals that felt the tremors. Mid-tier suppliers, the engine rooms of manufacturing, confronted an existential reckoning. These smaller firms, often family-run and lacking the financial buffers of industry giants, found their order books imperiled by the specter of tariffs. A parts manufacturer in Wisconsin, for example, discovered that nearly 30% of its revenue stemmed from exports to countries now applying retaliatory duties. Zeitz's insistence on defending open markets served as a rallying cry for these companies, many of which banded together in regional coalitions to lobby for relief. Grassroots advocacy groups formed, drafting letters to legislators and leveraging local media to underscore the human cost of trade hostilities. The David and Goliath nature of these efforts mirrored Harley-Davidson's own challenge to the administration, reinforcing the notion that even the mightiest policies could be contested by determined stakeholders. Equally profound were the reverberations in workforce development. As executives plotted relocation or expansion, questions arose about the availability of skilled labor in alternative jurisdictions. Vocational schools scrambled to design curricula that address the needs of advanced manufacturing, robotics, and digital quality control. Zeitz's public remarks on the necessity of a responsive, global-ready workforce reinforced the urgency of these reforms. Governments at state and provincial levels stepped forward with new apprenticeship programs and language training grants to facilitate mobility. Labor economists mapped the demographic shifts entailed by potential plant openings abroad, while social service agencies braced for transitions among domestic workers. The debate thus transcended the dance of duties and delved into the very architecture of human capital, a domain that Zeitz deftly illuminated through his call for agility in both policy and practice. Labor unions watched the tug-of-war between corporate leaders and the White House with a mixture of apprehension and opportunity. On one hand, the threat of relocations and tariff wars played into long-standing fears of job offshoring. On the other, Zeitz's emphasis on local assembly to mitigate political risk offered a blueprint for preserving domestic employment. Union negotiators began pressing for tariff contingent clauses in collective bargaining agreements, contractual provisions that would trigger wage supplements or job protection guarantees if a plant faced punitive duties, or if production targets shifted abroad. This innovative bargaining tactic signaled a broader trend: the rise of trade adjustment mechanisms embedded in labor contracts. By highlighting the fallout from uncertain trade policies, Zeitz had inadvertently paved the way for labor management partnerships that aimed to cushion the workforce against the vicissitudes of geopolitics. Technological innovation provided another answer to the tariff conundrum. Companies accelerated investments in advanced manufacturing technologies, robotics, additive printing, and AI-driven quality assurance to reduce their dependence on human-intensive processes that were easily disrupted by cross-border cost spikes. Zeitz's vision of decentralized, resilient production nodes dovetailed with these initiatives. A small, automated assembly line in a regional hub could pivot quickly to serve local markets, sidestepping the need for long-haul shipping and the entailed tariff risks. Pilot projects emerged in unexpected places. Modular manufacturing cells installed in repurposed warehouses in Eastern Europe, for example, or 3D printing farms co-located with distribution centers in Latin America. These experiments promised not only tariff evasion, but also rapid customization for local consumer preferences, an advantage in a world where agility trumps scale. Geopolitically, the skirmish over motorcycles and auto parts widened the aperture to include emerging trade blocs outside traditional alignments. Nations in the Indo-Pacific, Latin America, and Africa took note of Washington's confrontational tactics and explored deeper ties with one another. Frameworks such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, gained fresh momentum as countries sought insurance against U.S. policy swings. Zeitz's exhortation to defend multilateralism resonated in diplomatic circles, where envoys referenced Harley-Davidson's plight to argue for more inclusive, robust forums. As trade architects redrew charts to accommodate shifting allegiances, a multipolar trading system began to coalesce, one less tethered to the whims of any single capital. Wall Street's arbiters of long-term corporate value took heed. Pension funds, endowments, and sovereign wealth vehicles recalibrated their risk models to assign higher political risk premiums to firms heavily exposed to U.S. tariff policy. This channel of influence extended Zeitz's impact beyond direct industry engagement. By championing a more predictable trading environment, he shone a light on the hidden discount rates that investors applied to companies vulnerable to policy shocks. Asset managers began incorporating scenario analyses, modeling a spectrum of tariff outcomes into their valuations. As these financial institutions adjusted portfolio allocations, the pressure on corporate boards intensified. CEOs and CFOs found themselves accountable not only to regulators and consumers, but also to investors demanding defensible strategies in an uncertain world. The public contest between Harley-Davidson's CEO and the Oval Office also reshaped the way brands engage with civic discourse. Traditionally, motorcycle makers steered clear of overt political positioning, preferring to craft imagery around freedom, rebellion, and the open road. In the aftermath of Zeitz's rebuke, Harley-Davidson launched a series of community forums across key markets. Events framed less as sales pitches and more as roundtables on the future of trade, manufacturing, and employment. These gatherings invited local business leaders, policy wonks, and university scholars to dissect the broader ramifications of tariff skirmishes. By doing so, Harley-Davidson recast its marketing playbook. The roar of an engine became a backdrop for civic participation, transforming dealerships into hubs of dialogue. This shift did more than burnish the brand's authenticity. It forged new channels for consumer loyalty built on shared values rather than mere product performance. Alongside these grassroots initiatives, Harley-Davidson amplified its digital presence to shepherd the narrative. The company rolled out interactive web documentaries that trace the journeys of parts, from forging steel alloys to upholstering leather seats, underscoring the human expertise behind each bike. These digital vignettes served a dual purpose. They educated audiences on the complexity of modern manufacturing and subtly illustrated how capricious policy could disrupt livelihoods. In parallel, Harley-Davidson's social media strategist developed a suite of trade truth infographics that simplified economic concepts for lay viewers, encouraging enthusiasts to become informed participants in trade policy debates. This savvy deployment of content marketing demonstrated that corporations can wield storytelling as an instrument of public education, elevating consumer engagement beyond the transactional and into the realm of shared advocacy. Meanwhile, the clash prompted a renaissance in cross-industry alliances aimed at fortifying collective resilience. Unlikely partners, ranging from aerospace component suppliers to organic dairy cooperatives, joined forces under the banner of Global Manufacturing Compact, a coalition dedicated to lobbying for transparent trade rules and cooperative R&D programs. Harley-Davidson lent its stature to these efforts, hosting inaugural summits where members hashed out joint venture opportunities in advanced materials research and co-invested in modular robotics that could be repurposed across industries. By spearheading this collaborative architecture, Zeitz signaled a departure from zero-sum approaches. The coalition's ethos held that competitiveness and cooperation are not mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing. This movement reframed the narrative around industrial strategy, casting collective innovation as the antidote to the volatility of ad hoc tariffs. The reputational fallout from the trade conflict also drove a deeper integration of environmental stewardship into corporate agendas. Recognizing that sustainability could no longer be siloed, Harley-Davidson embarked on a pilot program to produce biocomposite motorcycle frames, partnering with university labs in Scandinavia. The initiative aimed to reduce reliance on petrochemicals, thus sidestepping the risk of future levies tied to carbon-intensive inputs, while appealing to environmentally conscious riders. Though still in early stages, the program exemplified how geopolitical pressures can accelerate green innovation. Other manufacturers took note, catalyzing a quiet yet decisive pivot toward eco-design. In boardrooms and research corridors, executives and engineers began exploring circular economy models for automotive assemblies, closing material loops and forging supply chains grounded in renewable resources. The upshot, policy turbulence inadvertently unlocked a wave of sustainable experimentation, one that may well endure long after tariff debates fade. Academic institutions, too, felt compelled to revisit curricula in light of the Harley-Trump showdown. Business schools introduced specialized seminars on trade warfare and corporate strategy, inviting Zeitz and senior Harley-Davidson executives as guest lecturers. These courses dissected the anatomy of trade disputes, the role of leadership rhetoric, and the interdependence of political and economic spheres. Simultaneously, engineering departments expanded their coursework on adaptive manufacturing, teaching students to design production lines that could pivot between different product families within hours. The cascading effect was a new generation of graduates equipped to navigate an era where policy, technology, and market dynamics intertwine more tightly than ever. The intellectual ferment ignited by Zeitz's intervention thus transcended the immediate conflict, embedding its lessons into the educational foundations of tomorrow's corporate and technical leaders. Investor activism also gained fresh momentum as a result of this clash. Traditional shareholder resolutions, once focused on executive compensation or board diversity, now began targeting trade risk disclosure. Fund managers representing pension funds and university endowments pressed companies to publish detailed scenarios outlining exposure to punitive duties and to articulate plans for mitigating those risks. Harley-Davidson's transparent communications, spurred by Zeitz's public stance, provided a blueprint for such disclosures. As a result, a new cadre of institutional investors emerged, wielding stewardship votes to reward companies that proactively address trade uncertainty. This nascent investor pressure reshaped the contours of capital allocation, ensuring that resilience to geopolitical shocks became a hallmark of corporate quality. Even as the dust settled on the immediate tariff threats, The reverberations of this high-stakes confrontation continued to inform the evolution of global governance. International standards bodies accelerated talks on automatic rebate mechanisms, protocols that would offset tariff hikes by adjusting VAT or sales taxes in importing countries. Meanwhile, diplomatic backchannels explored guardrail agreements that would cap tariffs at predefined ceilings, creating a legal cushion against escalatory cycles. Harley-Davidson's headline-grabbing defiance had underscored a simple truth. In a world where any administration can wield tariffs like a cudgel, the architecture of trade must evolve toward greater predictability and mutual accountability. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what do you think this means for US manufacturing and global trade moving forward? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.